before COVID, I had said I had given a talk on immigration in which I had said that I thought our policy should be geared much more to cultural compatibility, but we have to face up to the fact that there's a Western world and then there's a non-Western world or a third world in which many of our values are not shared. In fact, people are barely familiar with them. They're certainly not inculcated, and that it's just harder to assimilate those people or to have confidence that our way of life will continue if we bring a lot of people in who are not familiar with it, who don't have fealty to it or allegiance to it or whatever. And these are not original ideas on the right. But unfortunately, I said this might result in a shift in the racial profile of people come in. We'll obviously have fewer people from Africa. We'll have fewer people from some parts of Asia, and it'll be more white. Not that that many white people want to come to the United States. And this is what made the headlines. Amy Wax advocates for, excluding people of color from immigration, which of course isn't what I said at all. I said this might be the result, and therefore conservatives might be nervous about it. I was talking about what conservatives are willing to advocate. And, conservatives are very skittish about racial effects. In fact, that's something in the essays that I sent to you that I've written about, that one of the reasons fighting wokeness is so difficult, I think, and there's been so little success. I mean, there have been pockets of success. We can talk about the school wars, is because conservatives are so confused and ambivalent about the whole disparate impact, equal results phenomenon. And that I think is a problem on the right. People need to get their head on straight that under current conditions, if they're going to go back to color blindness, if they're going to go back to impartiality and, the classic meritocracy, we are not going to see proportional outcomes.
Yeah, hold on, Amy. I actually agree with that, and I want to talk about that. But I want to just ask you a question about this point about immigration, because I'm noticing that a large number of the immigrants who are coming from some parts of the non-Western world are doing quite well. I mean, I'm noticing that South Asians, for example, are all over the tech industries. I'm noticing that the East Asian first and second generation immigrants, from Korea, from China, are doing very well. And if you were to rank different ethnic groups by, income or occupational status or whatever, you'd find a number of non-Western immigrant populations, doing quite well in terms of wealth and PhDs and, so forth and so on. So non-Western is a pretty broad category. And the cultural characteristics of some of these immigrants. So that's one point, that some immigrants are doing quite well who are not from the West. The other point, though, is that it's very selective who decides to come. And even if I come from what Donald Trump called a shithole country, even if I come from a place that's not at all doing well, I might be an individual who, in virtue of electing to get the heck out of there, has characteristics that would redound to my benefit once I get here. So you paint with such a broad brush. How do you answer that concern?
It is a broad brush. I agree. It's a massive generalization. I think it does need to be refined to reflect a couple of facts that you pointed out. The first is that, we are seeing signal success of East Asians and South Asians who come here. But of course, as you recognize, they're a highly selected part of the population. They're a tiny, tiny elite. These places are so populous. They have so many people that if you bring in this tiny, tiny upper crust, right, you'll get a kind of critical mass of very capable people. I mean, there's no question about that whatsoever. So we have to distinguish mass immigration, which we're getting from the Hispanic, right, south of the border, which I think poses different questions and challenges from the Asian elites that we're getting. Now, that doesn't mean that this influx of Asian elites is unproblematic. I actually think it's problematic. I don't think it's problematic because of dysfunction or underclass behavior, because we're not seeing that. Although if we had mass migration from those countries, I think that would be a different matter. I think it's because there is this, let's call it danger of the dominance of an Asian elite in this country. And what does that mean? What is that going to mean to change the culture? And that's not a popular idea to say that. Like, why would you ever say
Well, what's
anything
the
like
danger? What would be wrong with having a lot of Chinese or of Indian or the Korean engineers, physicians, computer scientists, and whatnot running around here, creating value, enlivening the society? I mean, I don't see how we lose from that. How do we lose from that?
Well, does the spirit of liberty beat in their breast, Glenn? That is my question. Now, whenever I say that, here's what people say. Well, I mean, if you look at like the white legacy population, certainly the elites, does the spirit of liberty beat
Well,
in their breast?
that's a point.
I mean,
Yeah, that's a good point.
they've become so woke, but I consider that a very negative and
What do you mean
dangerous
by the spirit of
development.
liberty? You saying they're not Democrats, or somehow they're?
People who are
I mean,
Whiggish and
small
they're
d
out,
Democrats.
who are mistrustful of centralized concentrations of authority, who have a kind of "don't tread on me" attitude, who are focused on the Bill of Rights, on our freedoms, on our liberties, on sort of small scale personal responsibility, who are nonconformist in a good ways. And I think it's been written about Asians tend to be more conformist to whatever the dominant ethos is. So the wokeness, I'll give you an example of what concerns me, okay, of the sort of thing that's happening. And it's very caught up with the fashionable, multiculturalist, anti American sentiments that wokeness represents, because wokeness is now the luxury belief of the upper class. And that's what Asians think they have to ape if they're going to be upper class. They look at upper class white people and see what they believe, and they say, well, we have to believe what they believe because we want to be upper class too. So if you go into medical schools, you'll see that Indians, South Asians are now rising stars in medicine. They're sort of the new Jews, I guess you could say. But these diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, which are poisoning the scientific establishment and the medical establishment now, and I really think they are, who are the people in the front lines? South Asian women doctors. They are there at the barricades saying, oh, America is a racist society. It's an awful, terrible society. Of course, they chose to come here from India. Nobody ever asked them, like, why are you here? It's a terrible, awful, racist, irredeemable, evil society, and we need to revolutionize and reform it. Why are South Asian women saying that?
Well,
Why
Amy,
are they in the forefront of accusing us
what
and of advocating anti-American
what has their
sentiment?
South Asianness got to do with it? I mean, you just mentioned Jews yourself. You and I are both academics. There are a lot of Jews in the academy. The academy is rotten with the very wokeness that you're condemning. Am I going to blame the Jews for that?
Well, yes, I'm Jewish. I blame the Jews for
She
that.
said it,
I mean,
everybody. She said it. I
the
didn't.
Jews
Okay.
have abused their power. They have abused their prominence, abused their power, and abused their dominance in the academy, in my mind.
But I
And
don't attribute it to their Jewishness. I would attribute it to the logic of the institutional dynamic in which they're embedded, the academy, which has its flaws, of which the susceptibility to this kind of postmodern relativism and this obsession about identity is one. And so those who happen to be in the academy, I find disproportionately are adherents of this ideology, which I abhor, but not because they're Jews, likewise, not because they're from India. The,
oh, see, I disagree with you. I think there is. Let's go back to the South Asians who just love to bash America and be part of the whole DIE push, right? What is it about them that they are kind of scrambling all over each other to be in the forefront of this? I think there is a certain uh, conformity and sort of instrumentalism to the way they see rising in a society, which is, you know, forget the principles, forget about whether it's true or not, forget about whether America is a good place, a bad place, or a middling place. We see that this is the trend and we want to get on the bandwagon and be important and powerful and prominent. So we're going to be a part of this. And it's mindless. I mean, why should someone who immigrated from India, no, let me finish, and has taken advantage of everything our society has to offer, who is leading the good life, who is part of the elite, why shouldn't that person be abjectly grateful and, recognize overtly all the wonderful things about our country? Why should they be on the ramparts bashing our country? Me makes no
Well, let
sense.
me speak for them for a moment. They are merely conforming to the ethos that they have inherited when they entered into these institutions. They didn't bring wokeness with them. They didn't invent wokeness. They're just trying to get by. And by the way, many of them are deeply ambivalent about it. I think your characterization, your broad brush of South Asian, therefore adherence to this wokeness is not accurate. I mean, I think, for example, I just read Matt Taibbi's recent post about Loudoun County, Virginia, and he says, "What was the race story in Loudoun County?" This is a short version of his, I think, very fine reporting. He says it wasn't about critical race theory and how do you talk about race and slavery. It was about South Asian first and second generation immigrant families who want to get their kids into the top technical school in the area and who want gifted and talented and who are pissed off at the implicit racism against their success that the equity mongers who say there are not enough blacks in the gifted and talented and therefore we have to get rid of it are the Thomas Jefferson High School of Science and Technology, which is not in Loudoun County, but which Loudoun County sends many of its students to under a special program that was called into question because there are not enough blacks in the. And he says that's the real story that got Terry McAuliffe defeated in Virginia. Brown people, not white people, objecting to wokeness. So
Bill, you're right.